The island where myths breathe. Have you ever stepped into a place where the air feels older than time, where every breeze carries the breath of forgotten gods, and the earth hums with secrets too ancient to name? Welcome to Sri Lanka. Not just an island, but a heartbeat suspended in the Indian Ocean. Here, maps grow blurry, not because they're wrong, but because this place refuses to be boxed in by lines and labels. In Sri Lanka, the land doesn't just look ancient, it remembers. The trees seem to whisper stories you've never heard but somehow always knew. The rivers don't just flow, they recite. For centuries, this island has been a sacred crossroads of trade, of empires, of gods. You might say, isn't it just another tropical country? But then you feel it, in your chest, in your skin, in that unspoken way you know you've left your world behind. I remember my first night in Sri Lanka. The stars above Hapatale were so sharp they looked carved into the sky. A monk at a hilltop temple offered me tea and said simply, "Here, even the mountains meditate." And just like that, I knew. This wasn't a vacation. It was a homecoming to a part of me I didn't know I'd lost. So if you're ready, let's leave the map behind and walk into the myth. Because sometimes to find what's real, you have to start with what feels magical. And nowhere feels more like that than the mist-covered highlands of Yala, a place where stories climb mountains and legends live in the waterfalls. A kingdom in the mist, exploring the sacred peaks of Yala and Adam's Peak. Mornings in the highlands of Sri Lanka don't begin with alarm clocks. They begin with mist, thick, cool, silent. It creeps in through the valleys of Yala, curves along the ridges of tea-covered hills, and wraps around you like a prayer whispered by the earth itself. Yala isn't loud. It doesn't scream for attention. It just waits, like a sacred secret, patient and serene. But deep in its silence lies a story, one etched into the stones of a waterfall, carried in the breath of a legend. They say that Ravana, the demon king of Lanka, from the Indian epic Ramayana, once ruled here. The Ravana Yala Falls, crashing and foaming down the cliffside, is said to be the place where he hid Sita, the wife of the god King Rama. Stand by those falls long enough and you'll feel it, not fear, but the weight of myth, like you're trespassing in someone else's ancient memory. Then, a few hours drive away, another peak rises, not just in altitude, but in spirit, Adam's Peak. Some call it Sri Pada. To Buddhists, it bears the footprint of the Buddha himself. To Hindus, Lord Shiva. To Christians and Muslims, Adam, the first man, after his fall from Eden. One mountain, many beliefs, and every single one of them has climbed those 5,000 steps in search of something more than a view. I climbed it at night, torchlight flickering over stone, my breath shallow from the altitude, or maybe from awe. And when I reached the summit, just as the sky began to bleed orange and gold, I turned and watched the world wake up beneath my feet. It's strange how standing so high above everything can make you feel so humble. So if you ever find yourself lost in thought, in life, or in doubt, come to these peaks, not for the answers, but for the quiet that lets you finally ask the right questions. And once the mist lifts and your heart steadies, It's time to follow the scent of tea, tradition, and empire. Let's head to a place the British once called home, a corner of the tropics forever dressed in tweed and roses, Nuwara Eliya. Tea, time, and colonial echoes. Nuwara Eliya and the ghosts of Little England. If Ella is the island's breath, then Nuwara Eliya is its long-held sigh, a place where time doesn't just slow down, it rewinds. Perched over 6,000 feet above sea level, this cool, mist-draped town is where Sri Lanka gently lets its colonial memories resurface. The locals call it Little England, and strangely, it fits. There are rose gardens and horse tracks, stone-built cottages with red brick chimneys, and rows of tidy hedges framing manicured lawns. As if someone plucked a page from a Victorian travel diary and tucked it into the jungle. But beneath the lace and lavender is a deeper story, a story steeped in leaves. Because this is tea country. British settlers came here in the 19th century chasing cool air and crops. What they found was a climate so perfect it would change the island forever. Today, Nuwara Eliya is the beating heart of Sri Lanka's tea industry. Endless rows of green, neat, endless, hypnotic, curve around the hills like brushstrokes on a living canvas. I spent an afternoon walking through one of the oldest plantations. The air smelled like rain and sun-warmed leaves. And then I met her. An older woman, barefoot, back slightly bent, but with eyes that held the fire of 10 summers. She'd been plucking tea for over 40 years. She smiled and said, "Tea is memory. The plant never forgets." She told me how each leaf is touched by human hands before it becomes someone's comfort in a teacup a world away. And I thought, how strange and beautiful it is that something so ordinary can hold so much history in its steam. Yes, Nuwara Eliya is quiet, but listen closely and you'll hear the echoes of empires, the footsteps of long-gone governors, the laughter of children raised between two worlds. And when the mist fades and the teacup empties, we follow the trail of wildness and whispers, deep into the brush, where something ancient still prowls. It's time to step into the wilderness of Yala. Nature's wild cathedral, Yala National Park and the leopards of legend. But if tea fields are quiet hymns, then Yala is a roaring cathedral of the wild. Here in Sri Lanka's southeastern corner, the earth stretches out like a sunburned skin, scarred with brush, freckled with trees, and stitched together by dusty trails that lead to the unknown. Yala isn't a zoo. It isn't a safari in name only. It's a pulse, a heartbeat, a raw and untamed wilderness where you are the outsider, and the jungle decides if you're welcome. This is leopard country. Sri Lanka's leopards are larger than their African cousins, solitary, silent. They slip through the underbrush like shadows with secrets. And the people here, they don't just admire them, they revere them. One tracker I met, Sampath, grew up near the edge of the park. He told me that in his village, they believe some leopards are spirits of ancestors sent to guard the balance of the land. He said he once saw one stare directly into his eyes, unblinking, ancient, calm. He whispered, it didn't feel like a cat. It felt like a priest in fur. We spent hours in a jeep that day, bouncing over rocks, following paw prints in the dust. The sun dipped low, painting everything in gold and orange. And just when we were about to turn back, there it was, a shape between the trees, still, regal, watching. The leopard looked at us the way only nature looks at humans, with curiosity but no need. It turned and vanished. No sound, no goodbye, just an echo in my chest, like something sacred had just passed through me. But Yala is more than just leopards. It's elephants lumbering across open plains, crocodiles sunning by the riverbanks, peacocks dancing like royalty beneath the burning sky. This place reminds you, we are not separate from nature. We are stories that live inside it. And sometimes, the jungle tells those stories better than we ever could. So let's follow the footprints, not just of animals, but of civilizations. Because just a few hours away, beneath ancient stone walls, a city still whispers in many languages. Let's walk the cobbled paths of Galle. Forgotten forts and living streets. Galle and the story beneath the stone. Not all walls are meant to keep people out. Some, like those in Galle, are built to hold stories in. On the southwestern edge of Sri Lanka, where the ocean meets the land in a hush of salt and stone, stands one of the oldest colonial fortresses in Asia, Galle Fort. But calling it a fort feels too narrow. It's not just a structure. It's a living, breathing museum where centuries still walk beside you. Built first by the Portuguese, then fortified by the Dutch, Galle is a fusion of empire and island, east and west, past and present. Wander its narrow streets and you'll see it. Dutch-style windows beside Buddhist shrines, English tea shops next to ancient mosques, children kicking soccer balls against coral stone walls that once stood against cannon fire. I spent an afternoon there with a man named Imran, a third-generation bookseller whose shop sits tucked beneath an old archway. The air smelled of paper and cinnamon. He showed me a first edition map of Ceylon from 1796, its corners frayed, its ink faded, but its soul intact. He smiled and said, "In Galle, even maps don't stay still." And it's true, this place shifts, evolves. It remembers the Dutch but speaks Sinhala. It sells British postcards but fries local hoppers in roadside stalls. At sunset, I walked the fort walls. Couples held hands beneath fading skies. Fishermen cast lines below. And for a moment, it felt like time wasn't moving forward or back. It was just resting here, catching its breath. And beneath the stone and history, there's something deeply human in Galle. A reminder that places don't have to be grand to be powerful. They just have to endure. But now we leave the stone behind and follow the sea. Because just beyond the wall, legends float on the waves, and the ocean has tales no fort could ever hold. Let's wade into the mysteries of Unawatuna. Whispers from the ocean, Unawatuna, and the tales of the drowned. Begin with soft waves lapping the shore, distant conch shells and wind rustling through palm leaves. The ocean at Unawatuna doesn't roar, it whispers. It tells stories not with thunder, but with the hush of waves, the sway of coconut trees, and the rhythmic silence of loss. This crescent-shaped bay just south of Galle feels like paradise. White sands, turquoise water, and sunsets that drench the horizon in gold. But behind the beauty lie legends that drift beneath the surface. Fishermen here still tell tales of ships that vanished without a trace, of strange lights beneath the water at night, of voices that call out just before dawn. They say Unawatuna was once protected by a sea goddess, one who wept when her people stopped believing. And when the tsunami came in 2004, many claimed they heard the sound of conch shells, not as a warning, but as a mourning. I met a diver named Dylan who lost his brother that day. He dives not just for coral or fish, but for memory. He said, "The sea never forgets, it just waits." We sat by the water that evening, and he pointed to a rock formation just offshore. Locals call it the Drowned Temple. They say it was once a place of worship, swallowed by the waves when humans grew arrogant. He smiled faintly. Some say the gods left. I think they're just deeper now. But Unawatuna is also healing. Children now splash where waves once crashed in fury. Locals have rebuilt homes, shops, dreams. At night, the beach glows with lanterns. And if you walk quietly, you'll hear music drifting from a firelit cafe, the clink of glasses, the low hum of life carrying on. Because that's what this place is, a balance between mourning and celebration. A reminder that beauty is not the absence of pain, but its transformation. And as the tide pulls back and stars rise over the ocean, it's time to return inland, to where old meets new, tradition dances with neon, and sacred relics share space with skyscrapers. Let's rise with the lotus in Colombo. From temple bells to lotus towers, old spirits in a modern city. Colombo doesn't sneak up on you. It arrives with energy. The capital of Sri Lanka, a swirl of color, culture, and contradiction, where tuk-tuks zip past colonial mansions and the scent of curry rides the breeze beside espresso cafes. But even in this neon-dusted skyline, the past still lingers, not as a memory, but as a presence. Walk through the bustling streets near Peta Market and you'll see it. Temple bells ringing above phone booths, monks weaving through malls, street vendors selling incense beside LED screens. And then, just beyond the city's heartbeat, rises something remarkable: the Lotus Tower. Over 1,100 feet tall, this architectural bloom watches over Colombo like a guardian from the future. Its petals catch the sun at dusk, glowing pink and gold, a symbol of resilience, rebirth, and rising above. I took the elevator to the observation deck just before sunset. Below, the city pulsed. Cars, cranes, children laughing. And far in the distance, the Indian Ocean shimmered like memory. Next to me stood an elderly woman, a teacher from Kandy. She leaned on the glass and whispered, "The world has changed, but the tooth is still here." I didn't understand at first, but then she explained, just a few miles away, in the calm cradle of Kandy, rests Sri Lanka's most sacred relic, the tooth of the Buddha. Protected, venerated, celebrated, a fragment of the past, holding a nation together through centuries of kings, colonizers, and chaos. That's Colombo in essence. The lotus and the tooth, modern and mystical, electric and eternal. And maybe that's what Sri Lanka truly is. Not a destination, but a dance. Between land and spirit, memory and momentum, stillness and storm. So if you ever wonder where you belong, or feel like the world's moving too fast, remember this island. Because here, time doesn't vanish, it breathes. And if you're quiet enough, you might just hear it.